Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to this joint event between DAMA and the BCS. My name is Sonubi Taylor. I am an enterprise data architect at Sage. So in simple terms, that means that I help Sage figure out how best to arrange, collate, organize their data so they can do the most and help our customers be as wonderful as they are. So thank you so much for your time. Again, I am going to present my screen so that you can learn about the wonderful events that we have coming up. All right, so as you see, this is a joint event between the British Computing Society Data Group, BCS Women, and DAMA. So it's to recognize the lack of diversity and how it impacts us. We're interested in bringing up how diverse data is, not only just collating diversity in data, but how diverse data itself as a profession is. So we're hoping through these talks that, one, they're informative, they leave you with a bit of curiosity, and if you're new to data, or even if you are a person who's been in data for 20 or more years, we hope that this helps to add more tools to your tool belt or your toolbox. So again, we have not only our lovely speaker Tosin here, but we also have many other talks during the week. We've had a few earlier in the week, and on Thursday and Friday, we have some lovely panels. As you see on Friday the 16th, we have a panel, Data and Diversity and Inclusion. On Thursday, we have how do you get into data and how do we attract that diverse talent? And on Thursday, also in the afternoon, we have the evolving landscape of data and, of course, bias, which is also a very interesting and fascinating topic. So just in the interest of time, I'd like to stop presenting so that I can introduce our lovely speaker who we have on the call with us today. So we have with us Tosin, and she's been a data engineer since 2021, but she's achieved so much wonderful things within that time. She credits her neurodiversity to the unique way that she navigates the space and the challenges within it. Tosin also has experience as a DEI consultant and a science communicator and speaker. She leverages all of these facets about herself in her current data career. She's very passionate and is always looking at ways to pay it forward, and therefore engages in various outreach and volunteering activities and initiatives. She's active in many groups supporting underrepresented individuals and the future of tech. So with her technical background in data governance and ethics, Tosin advocates for the fair use of data and engineering for good. So today's session is going to be about people have long sought to improve inclusion within their organizations, but knowing how to measure it, define inclusivity, and just in general, put some action behind those numbers has been the elusive thing that's hard to pin down. So the policy of data inclusion, data-driven inclusion, is what provides people these actionable insights. And I'm going to turn it over to Tosin to talk more about that. And we're very, very excited for this talk. Tosin, we can't hear you if you're talking, sorry.
There you go.
Okay,
Hi.
we can hear you now.
Is that better?
Yes.
Awesome.
Hi,
everybody. Sorry for that false start. I'm really happy to be invited to speak to you guys about data-driven inclusion and overcoming some of those challenges. It's a topic that's very close to my heart as someone who works in data and also is very passionate about DEI work. And I think that the space in itself, in recent years, we've been having a lot more conversations about diversity and inclusion, and then also moving that to how can we use the tools and techniques that we've developed around data to really drive that to be something that has maybe some different kind of methodologies behind it, and ultimately deliver value for those individuals within organizations and just in general. So let's get into it. So I wanted to start by telling you a bit about, I guess, why I'm here talking to you guys about data-driven inclusion. You might think, oh, she's only been out of university for a few years now. What makes her someone with subject matter expertise? But I think part of my subject matter expertise on data-driven inclusion comes from my story. So I went to pursue engineering, as anyone does, and I found that the environment wasn't one that was really built to help me thrive. Earlier it was mentioned that I'm neurodiverse, but then it's also the aspects of being like a Black woman, and that whole environment of engineering and the culture was something that frequently challenged my desire to be an engineer. And it challenged me not because of what the day job actually entails, but because of how I felt around the profession and maybe the future of the role itself. And I think that that's not a unique experience. I think a lot of people are often challenged in their workplaces or things that they engage with, not because of the reason why they're actually pursuing that specific thing, but it's a lot of cultural aspects and things that might often go unseen or unheard. So that really motivated me to kind of put together some of my technical know-how with my knowledge of DE&I through like my lived experience, because I think one thing that's really important to speak about in work with inclusion is that often it is about lived experiences. And in my mind, those are data points to add to the rest of the wealth of data that we can kind of collect around inclusion. So having that experience really motivated me. So within my uni, I started and was a founding member of Warwick Women's Engineering Society, and I worked with WES, which is the Women in Engineering kind of society, which is global, also working with the IET and other large institutions to look at some issues that we've been facing around the culture of engineering and things like that. So I've been doing that for a while now. But I guess so when we get down to it, what is inclusion? So for me, inclusion is really about allowing people to access spaces, providing them opportunity, and allowing them to participate wholeheartedly, being involved in conversations. And inclusion is often talks about in hand with diversity, but in reality, it is quite different. Diversity is having people in the room, bringing people in. And it's often in data terms, we talk about diversity data, which will be the representation of certain groups within an organization. But inclusion is more about that experience piece. It's about they're in the room, but right, how are they existing in the room? Are they able to do all of the activities that they require without assistance? How are we supporting them in achieving their aspirations and those kind of things? And I think one great thing about inclusion is it goes beyond just bringing people in. It's that experience, and that's why I like to focus on the inclusion piece as opposed to the diversity piece, because I think if we're doing great things in terms of inclusion, then the people that we have in the room will want to stay there, and also they'll likely tell other people about all the great things that they're experiencing. So we will end up having more diverse people in the room as like almost a side effect of being good at inclusion. So I thought when I was designing this PowerPoint about, though we have data-driven inclusion, like what are the challenges that we face in inclusion? Because I think it's quite a jump to go from, oh, I want to be inclusive, I want to have my organization be more accessible for people, and then going straight to data. So I think back to when my story and my experience of kind of not having that inclusion around, and then doing it more anecdotally and kind of understanding some of the challenges I faced when I wasn't actually using data as part of this. And I think those challenges can really be encompassed in these 3 different areas here. So you've got the awareness piece, where a lot of people find it hard to perceive the barriers that are in place for people. And I know that as a society, we're starting to get more empathetic to it, but it's sometimes quite hard for people to understand if you're not having that lived experience that, oh, for instance, I really struggle if there aren't closed captions on things. And it's not that I am hard of hearing, it's that I need it in terms of auditory processing and being able to understand what people are saying. So it's kind of perceiving those barriers in order for us to kind of remove those and find solutions for people so that those barriers aren't in place. And then I guess it comes to that other piece there where we've perceived the barriers now, but how are we going to remove those? Oftentimes it does require some sort of investment of either time, money, or energy, because of the way society is set up, that some of these barriers aren't kind of enforced by our institutions, but they're kind of just things that have been propagated through larger systems at play. So designs for most houses have multi-stories, but that's inherently inclusive for people who might not be able to use stairs. So how are we going to actually take the time and energy and potentially money and invest in actually removing those barriers? And then the third one there is the commitment. So with inclusion, because it is so much about that larger lived experience piece and actually transforming things on a larger scale than just bringing people in, one-off inclusion doesn't really work well. It doesn't really function because we need that to be a consistent effort and an ongoing effort. And often in organizations, you need that buy-in for a larger period than, oh, we're going to do an inclusion event. We need to actually see people buying into inclusion for the whole organization as an ongoing piece. So those are some of the challenges that you face. And I think that data can really help us overcome some of these challenges. So yeah, what is data-driven inclusion? Because I've been talking a fair bit about it, and it does seem like quite a string of buzzwords, to be honest. So you've got the data there, and it's not maybe data in the conventional sense of data you'd think of, numbers or tables of data, but there are so many ways in which we can use data to really aid us in becoming really inclusive. So for me, data-driven inclusion is using insights, information to drive how we redesign things with the aim of inclusion. So that can really help us answer some of these large questions like, oh, I want to be inclusive, but how do I prioritize my resources? How do I really look to serve those people in my organization as a starting point? So I think the data-driven part of it is something that helps resolve some of those really large, ambiguous questions that we might face around inclusion and some of the struggles that often companies go through when trying to be inclusive. Is inclusivity is massive, and it can mean so many different things to different people. So the data-driven part is really looking at my workforce, for instance, and really doing the best we can for them as a priority, and then looking to larger sense of inclusion and really having those kind of conversations. Okay. So yeah, like I said, why should we use data-driven inclusion as opposed to regular inclusion? I highlighted some of the challenges of just inclusion may face, but I think data can kind of combat a lot of those challenges. One thing data also does really well is it provides a really good case for inclusion. You can use a lot of the evidence within the data to kind of advocate for why solutions should be implemented and why we should be doing this work. So I think data-driven inclusion versus regular inclusion is really powerful in terms of converting those who might not see the immediate value. I think also with data-driven inclusion, it allows us to be a lot more proactive instead of reactive. I think sometimes when we think about inclusion, it might be as a response to someone being not included in a space. But with data-driven inclusion, we can really get to know what is going on in general in our work environment before anything bad actually manifests, and we can put things in place that will ensure that people can really take part. But it's also a learning process, so we know that there is going to be a part of it where we're still learning and still implementing better practices consistently. And I think another part of data-driven inclusion that is great is because once you implement something with the idea of it creating more inclusion, we can actually review that. If we're collecting data, we can see, oh, before the point of implementing the solution, this is the state of things, and after, have things improved? Have we maybe missed the mark on this one? And that makes it a lot more sustainable. And I think that also part of that allows us to kind of have a wider holistic sense of how we're doing. So in the data world, you might be quite familiar with the data, insight, action. And I think you can quite simply break down data-driven inclusion into those kind of steps. So our data part is where we're collecting numerical data points. And this, for example, could be our diversity data. We could also be getting some compounded data on top of that, where we can kind of lay that over the top for more context, where we could be receiving surveys, or we could be looking at what people have said in exit interviews and those kind of things. So that way we're collecting quite a good imagery of what people's experiences are and kind of coming to a better understanding of some of our weak points and areas for potential improvement. I think from that is really the bit where, so your data has empowered you to understand, oh, this area needs improvement, but then it's the onus is on you to interact with the research that is currently being conducted in terms of the standards of inclusion that people can put in place in the workplace. I know that recently a lot has been going on around the neurodiverse space, and that there are new insights coming out constantly about how to make environments more inclusive. So there is some onus on whoever's conducting this process to actually look out into just general industries or just the internet in general and kind of research and find out what is happening to understand potential solutions that you could implement to resolve some of those weak points that you might be experiencing. And then from that, the action is to apply these changes in a strategic manner and seek feedback. And I think that is really key. So applying these changes in a strategic manner, I would say, would be rolling them out to people who would be likely impacted by these changes, and also making sure that these changes or the availability of a solution has been widely publicized, because I think inclusion is great and putting things in place that intend to create inclusive environments are great, but if no one knows about them, then it kind of means nothing. So there's really a large point about engagement in that and making sure that that is kind of highly publicized. And then to follow up on that, we need to always seek feedback, because this blanket of inclusion doesn't work in the same ways for everyone. We're all intersectional people where we have different elements of our lives that all intertwine to make who we are. And so one solution which might work for some people won't always work for another set of people. So being understanding in the fact that that may be the case, and also understanding that that feedback is really part of inclusion, because kind of a culture of feedback is where we really kind of dig deep and learn. So that is truly how I see the process of kind of doing data-driven inclusion. So yeah, I was fortunate to consult with an organization, and that experience was really good for me. But I also realized quite a bit. I think being someone who is a DEI consultant, you often get a lot of people coming to you who are already so far on their journey, or actively seeking to improve their processes. So you don't always see the full picture of the state of things. And I think with a lot of reporting that a lot of organizations are doing on their diversity metrics, there is some focus that we see in organizations where they're purely looking at, okay, we're lacking certain demographics within our company and we need to boost those. So for my consulting, I was within an organization, and looking at their data, I was seeing that we've got a 47% drop off within women as they go from the mid-level roles to the more senior roles. And that was seen across the board, but even more so in their technical roles. And as someone who aspires to be a senior at some point, within like senior leadership in the tech role, that was really challenging for me. And coming to understand more, looking at exit interviews and also information about the ecosystem of like tech, and also understanding how women role progression often works, it became obvious that this organization wasn't necessarily supporting women in that progression as much as they could have been. And so it was an opportunity kind of problem, and an engagement and participation problem, if we go back to the challenges of inclusion that I spoke of earlier. So I suggested implementing a returner scheme and a formalized mentorship program for those people who have aspires to be in senior leadership roles. And then that's the insights that I got mainly from looking at the drop-off data. But then also with the heightened awareness of the data that I was able to see with regards to exit interviews, if anyone had said anything meaningful in those, which would allow me to understand more, was that I'm also aware that a lot of women have caring responsibilities put on them in a way that some men don't. So allowing the company to kind of really dig into that. Why are we seeing a drop off? Is it just because women don't aspire to have senior leadership roles? No, it is partially symptomatic of wider society, but also we can support women in that. So understanding how introducing flexible working arrangements within reason really alleviates some of this drop off, and reviewing our compensation package. I think it's hard sometimes to talk about money with organizations because they don't want to really give out money, and they're more keen to do other things like set up mentorship programs or returner schemes. But at the end of the day, it's all investment in your workforce. So really knowing and seeing the nuance in those situations is something you need to be very tapped into. Slide. But I say all of this with the caveat that with great data comes great responsibility. I think it would be remiss not to mention that with diversity data, with surveys, with exit interviews, with just seeing general engagement in certain schemes that your organization may be running, you have to be so careful. There is elements of like GDPR that you need to be very aware of, especially when you're working with very small organizations, where in analyzing data and doing those breakdowns of, oh, we have X amount of women within those roles, it becomes almost like you're identifying specific people because there's so few people working in that organization. Diversity and inclusion and really being data driven is not about identifying individuals, we want to learn more about like the larger environment and the culture. So if you do disaggregate and you start to get to the level where there's fewer than 5 people, I would really challenge the value of doing that disaggregation. So, and also there are inherent biases in all of us, I think. I think that it's remiss to say that us in designing surveys or conducting exit interviews aren't putting our own bias into that. So we really need to be vigilant of that. And I would be very sure to, if your team has like user-centered design people or someone to engage, to ensure that the survey is as neutral as possible and allows people to really express their views. That would be really helpful. I think also we need to be transparent about what we're doing with the data. I think people are very cautious to give away personal information about themselves, and that's understandable. And if we want to improve inclusion, I think that's why I didn't go with diversity data being our only driving force, because I think that that takes a lot of trust to give someone, and often there might be like hidden elements of yourself that you aren't feeling open to disclose to maybe your managers or people within your team, but you still need those adaptations and adjustments to make your life easier. So I think being transparent with people really helps. Letting people submit things anonymously, having forms in that nature really helps. And I think that for the most part, we don't need to know anything about who this individual is. I think there is so much value that we can draw from verbatim, like comments that people have. If you have like a feedback box, that is like the original form of like data collection, where it's like write whatever you think, say whatever you think, and reviewing that feedback and really learning about people's experiences within your organization is super meaningful. Okay, so I'm about to wrap up, and I really wanted to just hit on some of these key takeaways that I hope you guys have kind of got from this talk. So it is so much more than diversity data. And diversity data can be great because we can see who's within our organization, the different demographics that we have, and we can understand that maybe the way that we're currently functioning attracts these people, and these people, they've stayed, so the experience must be somewhat enjoyable, but we can also miss a massive chunk of the kind of true insight around that, where we don't know actually about their experience. We just know they're here within the company, and we know, for example, we might have a lot of leavers from certain demographics, but we don't know why, because that why is really what we need to get to the inclusion work. And then off that, having all that data, again, we really need to be responsible, and having individuals' data has so many implications. So I would suggest engaging the relevant people and only the relevant people in any diversity or inclusion data activities that you're undertaking, and letting people know what their data is being used for, and being super honest about it, and being honest about the whole process you guys are going through, because I think venturing in to do inclusion work can be really hard, and you're not going to get it right the first time. So I think kind of being honest about the process, and in some cases letting people know what's going on. And I know that at certain organizations, they'll have like dashboards of their like diversity data, but they'll also have like a report of, given that data and other elements of data that we've got, this is what we have done in terms of like any manipulations or insights we've particularly looked at, and then the actions we plan to take. So informing whoever the impacted person from your inclusion work is going to be, informing them on the steps that you're taking in the process, I think is a really good step. And then finally, like I said, the feedback loop is an amazing thing because it allows us to continuously improve. But I think that's something you have to be really intentional about setting up. I think that there are a lot of people who have ideas and want to be involved in how to make things more inclusive, and having that feedback culture really allows them to engage, and you get inclusion champions that just spring up out of the woodworks that you wouldn't have known about if you didn't have that feedback loop and that information coming back to you. So it's really vital that you really make use of that feedback loop to also identify who is an inclusion champion, and then also how you guys can work together to really improve the state of things for everyone's betterment. Awesome. And that is it from me. Thank you so much for listening. I think we'll be going to questions.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much for that. Very informative. Learned a lot. And also, I really like not only when you said with great data comes great responsibility, but also I really liked where you talked about if people are going to hand over or fork over this diversity data, they have to know that they're protected, that they're taken care of, and they know that if I'm going to tell you that, say, for example, I'm neurodiverse, I'm this, I'm that, my religion is whatever, whatever it is, so I can get these accommodations, that also I have to know that one, something will be done with the information.
Yeah.
And then two, that I am protected from anything else that could happen with the information. We have a question here from an anonymous attendee that says, how do you make sure these protections are in for staff? You have, organizations. Do you have any organizations that you can give some examples of practices or policies where they not only support inclusion, of course, but they protect staff from having that data used for other things that are misappropriated, that are not what it was intentionally used for? I guess the Facebook, Amazon, I give you my data for this, but you use it for something else.
So at my previous employer, Allianz, we did really great work around how to anonymize diversity data. I'm not sure if it's all public, but I think there are classic anonymization techniques that you can use to kind of scrub any relation back to a certain individual. I think there is also something in having this be a task that is taken on by data practitioners or practitioners within your institution, who essentially are people who function on a code of ethics. I undertake ethics training regularly due to the work that I do. So for me, this isn't something that I take lightly. And I think that it should be the same for a lot of people. But essentially, by the time I get the data, it should never have anything that could trace back to anyone. And what you can do is set up dummy data, example data with random things in to test out a cleaning method that takes you from the inputs from surveys, etc., to what you want to look at the end. And you can set that up before you even send out your surveys or etc., so that it runs through almost automatically, so that you just load the file in and it does all that lovely cleansing and scrubbing of that identifiable properties. So it gets to the point where you see it and that's it. And I would encourage people to do that before even touching real data. And really, I think that the way I like to think about it is like a sandbox where we can play around with things before touching things that could actually cause harm, which I think is a really important process.
Absolutely. So from that, it means that that there's a group of women, a group of men, maybe a group of whoever it's maybe, I don't know, of whatever religion, race, whatever, but you don't know it's Tom, Soini, Tosin, whoever else, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I think another part is also knowing your organization. So I think with the example of my previous employer, where we've got I don't know, going over 1,000 employees, it makes it very harder for it to kind of be identifiable within the organization. But if I was working within a team of 10 people, I would maybe be like, let's not even do that part, because no matter what I do, once I break it down into groups, I know that I'm going to be able to identify someone. So that's why I think there's diversity data is great, but then I can be like, scrap that actually, because if we're looking at experience of people, then we can just get those insights in other ways. So I would often say, depending on the insight that you're kind of trying to draw out, because you can still send around a survey and ask people about how are they finding things, how are they experiencing maybe their use of technology, is everything accessible to them in the way that they want. You can do that without capturing anybody's kind of representative characteristics that are protective. You don't need that information. So it's, I think a massive thing is only collecting the information that you need and really being aware of what's needed for you to do the next stages of the process.
No, that's great. I have another question here that's asking if you can shed more light on GDPR in relation to DEI or EDI, or whichever way the letters go around. If you can shed a little bit more on, you know, as their protected characteristics, but still how to get the diversity, inclusion, and equity out of that.
So I think one thing is we have to be really upfront about saying, often I think in organizations, they'll have like a separate survey that's optional to fill in. And one thing I love to say is that please fill it in, but if you want to say prefer not to say to everything, that is also really good data. Because prefer not to say tells me that essentially you could sit in any characteristic. So depending on how I'm looking at manipulating the data, you can put prefer not to say in the both sections of like whatever characteristic I'm trying to look at. And that will essentially mean that if you say prefer not to say, we're just going to try and make more things inclusive anyway. So there's that part. I think it's really important to make sure people feel safe and protected in terms of GDPR in relation to DEI work. And I am a massive proponent of really just letting people know exactly what we're going to do with things, but also letting them know that you don't have to be involved. Like, this is completely optional. And if you don't get involved, I really respect the fact you haven't, because I don't want people to feel like this work is not going to happen without their involvement, though it might look different in the way that it manifests. It's really important to let people know that this work's going to happen regardless. But if they could provide anything, it would really be appreciated. And also letting people know that because of the anonymization process that you undertake, after a certain time, it would be hard to withdraw their information. So I've had people who've submitted and then want to remove their submission, for example. But if I've anonymized as well as I should be, that process shouldn't be possible. So in a way, that brings more comfort to the person, being like, oh, I don't want to have my data involved. Well, I actually don't know what your data is. So that is kind of like a hard toe to line, but also letting them know that you have X amount of period after you submit if you do want to remove. So letting them know that nothing you've done is kind of final. And then also, if we review our data again, you don't have, because you did it the first time, you don't have to do it the second time. I think there's a lot in being really verbose and communicating a lot with anyone who you're asking for your data from, and making sure that the way that we store the data is in line with GDPR. So that means I'm not going to hold the data for a ridiculous amount of time. And I'm essentially, once I get it in, remove any personal information and delete that completely out of existence. And what I have will only be stored for, I believe it is the 5-year period, but depending on the use as well. And also being really specific in, this data will only be used for this. and having the guardrails and controls around making sure that that is the case.
Now, that's absolutely brilliant that you mentioned not only you're only using the data for the said use, but also it's not being kept for any other use outside of that. It's also anonymized, and you make sure that it's only kept for a certain period of time. As you know, retention policies, people will keep data in perpetuity and forget about it, and it's someone's laptop and whatever, but it's for a stated period of time, for stated use, anonymized, where even if they wanted to pick it out 2 years later, it won't be possible because we don't know who is Joe versus whoever versus whatever, because it's been anonymized to that point.
Yeah, I think another point that I just had based on what you said is also making sure the data is stored securely, so that, for instance, anything related to like DEI data, I would never store on like a personal device. That would be in a cloud that's controlled by whoever owns the whole of that division. And so that when they remove it from there, it's gone from everywhere. You don't want it to be attached to anyone's personal devices or anything like that, because though it might not be like malintent, that is really a sticky area. And I don't think that anyone wants, no one wants their data to be in anyone's hands that it shouldn't be. And kind of having it on someone's personal device is just like stepping out from that protection where the data shouldn't be. So yeah.
No, I'm glad you actually caught on to that point and mentioned that, because that's also a worrying thing. As you know, in data, people are not only worried about if you have the data, but where is it stored? How's it kept? Who's keeping it? Whose eyes are on it? How long are their eyes on it? And yes, as we know in the news, there's many, it was on a laptop, it was on a disk, it was on a this, we're not trying to have those breaches in that way happen. Ever.
Definitely.
We have another question here. What tools are you using to clean the data? If you can list maybe some examples.
So I'm a data practitioner myself. I prefer to stray away from using tools, and I'd rather kind of like construct my own pipelines to clean the data. I know that there are some tools available, but as I said earlier, we need to be very careful about what tools we use, because some tools will clean your data for you, but they'll also look at the data while cleaning it. So I would recommend trying to seek out professionals who can kind of construct that for you if that skill set is available within your organization. And if not, be very cautious around any tools that you're using. I know that there are, for instance, if you're using like Excel, Python, etc., some tools that are already embedded in those systems that I think would be suitable to use, but it's if you're buying in a tool from somewhere else that I would be really careful about using that.
So then that means maybe no open source things, or is it a matter of maybe once the data's been scrubbed, maybe?
Yeah, so I think depending on, so within some organizations, they'll have like an approved list of like open source tools and the versions that you have to use. Yeah. So if that has been kind of declared, I would also seek to clarify, because those may change based on the sensitivity of this data, and DAI data is very sensitive. So I would be extra cautious with that. And I know that there are some open source tools available to do so. So I would just be cautious. I haven't used open source tools in my history, but I know that some people do for similar things. So yeah.
Okay. And I don't see any other questions at the moment. So if there's any other questions, please put it into the Q&A, and I'll get to those. But I did want to ask, you mentioned the example before where you said 47% of the women were kind of dropping off between mid to senior level. which I thought was quite interesting because you can't be what you can't see. So, you know, if there's no senior level women in an organization, that might put off other women who might want to be promoted or try to get to that path of promotion to that senior level. What can you say a little bit about what was done in that organization and maybe turn it around, or how they use that data to maybe help get to the next step?
So with that organization, we really took quite a thorough approach in terms of identifying. So we see this drop off, then I went in and kind of actually did like a shadowing sorts, where I'm like just trying to understand more about the organization and how things are here, and maybe having some conversations with people, both male and female, because I think that often we do focus on the impacted party, but I think that part of it, and we talk a lot about allies, and we also need to be aware of their perspective of things. So really engaging with people. I think what the course of action that I recommended, like listed previously, was to review the compensation package, a returner scheme, and then also in terms of looking at mentorship and flexible working. So what some of the issues from conversations with people was really revealed was that the organization does really well with actually women, but up until that point, and it was kind of because of the systems that were in place in order to get promoted to the next level. So they had like a long course where you had to learn a lot about how to be a manager and those kind of things if you wanted to become more senior, because that was kind of in the pipeline. And then also understanding that how things worked with, for a lot of women, wouldn't be able to complete it because this course was over multiple years, and you can't really go to the next level without being promoted, like by having done this course. So it was kind of digging into the fact that a redesign the course content would be like the ultimate solve, and maybe like understanding that different people have different life experience, because a lot of women that I talked to had career breaks due to like caring responsibilities or a decision to have a child, and then that would cause a gap in the course, which would essentially stop them from doing completing the course and getting the promotion. But then also because of that, no women from like internally had ever become managers or like senior roles, so it was hard for people to come in and see that pipeline and be able to envisage it. But people externally could come in automatically and kind of become managers based on management experience elsewhere. So really understanding some of those issues. And I think with some of the things that I highlighted, in terms of the flexible working part, which would kind of allow for people to also take breaks from this ongoing course that they had to complete, but also looking at how we can be more understanding of people's life situations, because I think that though we look through the lens of women having that drop off, there's also that barrier to entry for other groups because of that like long ongoing course required to be a manager or someone more senior. So that was something that was quite surprising to me because I hadn't really heard of something in the same way. But as a result of kind of implementing some of these reviews, I think currently the course is no longer a prerequisite to go for a more senior role, which is something that I think is a really positive impact. And then they've broken it down into even like smaller modules that you could take, like, oh, do a week of this course and then you continue your responsibilities and actually apply those learnings as well. Because I think with such a long course, even though it's not completely continuous, it's hard to be able to kind of apply those and show that you're really got the skill set required to be a manager if it's overarching such a lengthy amount of time.
Absolutely, because I'm sure within that, Just like you said, people can come from outside, so they have the experience to become a manager. Maybe the people within have that experience to become a manager, but because of the course, you can't take experience in lieu of.
Yeah.
It's just check the box and move on. It's not a matter of, well, I've been doing these things that could constitute the same as this course, but because it's just the course or nothing,
Yeah.
there's no other way to go about it, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite telling as well that that was kind of, I think, because of the engineering industry and how we think about things, sometimes it can be quite formulaic. It's like, obviously, if you've done the course, you're a manager. But like actually breaking it down and being like, so what is the course really teaching people, and can we get those skills in other areas, is something that I encourage people to do. But I understand how hard it is to challenge an industry or an institution that has existed for years and functioned in a way that is deemed effective and good. But it's like, good for who? Because we're maneuvering in like a more multi-ethnic or like diverse society than ever now. So we really need to think about redesigning those systems to be good for everyone.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I am going to ask my other panelists to see if they have any other questions. Hi, Ed.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Soini, and thanks, Tosin. A fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed all the elements of that. I like the connection between the data and the action and coming back. It's really quite powerful. One thing I was curious about, given your experience as a data practitioner, but then applying the ILENS, the data, and collecting data on behalf of a wider organization, were you able to see differences in approaches between the data or the tech team on one hand and different parts of the organization? Just reflecting back to see whether we're in a better or worse shape as a sector, you know, the data and IT people. Do you have any insight in that?
So I think because of a lot of the conversations that are actually going on at the moment in respect to like algorithmic bias and things like that, a lot of like the data and IT professionals are kind of reflecting on themselves and how their company is actually working, which I think is a really positive space to be in. I think that there is still often like a fair bit of work to go, but I think that there are a lot of like nuggets of hope in there. And I also think because of what was the massive event that was COVID, we've all come to understand a lot more about kind of different ways of kind of existing. So we're all more open to change. And I think we all have a bit more of an appetite for kind of like differences, because we know how easily that we've experienced those some similar differences. And so I think that I have a lot of hope for the kind of profession as a whole. And I think that a lot of the really great examples of work with respect to inclusion are a lot of like tech and data institutions, because I think they understand that I want a diverse team to produce great products that are great for everyone. So it's kind of having that understanding of, I want a diverse team, but if I want that so badly, I need to make this an environment that they can really exist and thrive in. Because I think there is a point in wanting to optimize people's experience.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a really positive note. Thank you.
I just wanted to add on the end of that, also, I'm seeing that organizations are realizing that diversity just in general is worth money, you know, it's worth dollars and cents, pounds and pence, whichever, you know, but it's worth actual money. It's no point in an example like Apple creating a phone that's too big for people's hands because you didn't actually have a diverse group of people you tested the phone amongst. You know, you can't even say it's too big for women's hands, or, you know, there are people with different size hands, it doesn't matter. Or maybe someone who's able to use that, or maybe they're not able to, or it may not be good for someone who's sight challenged, whatever it might be. you know? So it's one of those things where people are realizing that you can't sell products in the way you used to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so I went to a conference earlier today, and one of the things we mentioned is that there are actually companies who are seeking out like more diverse data than like just what the industry standard is, because they find that if we actually get really good, rich data, work with diverse groups of people, that we aren't facing these problems later on in development where we have to backtrack and redevelop everything, because we started from such strong foundations. And I think that's really a testament to the fact that diversity is something that should be the norm in terms of our data, the groups that we work in. And I think that for that to become the norm, people need to realize the value in it. And once they see the value, they'll really push for that. But it's like understanding the value. And I think once someone said that when diversity and inclusion becomes profitable, it's going to really become something that everyone wants to embody. And I think we're getting to that point where it really is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Slowly but surely. Some companies are getting it, but slowly but surely for the rest, right? Slowly but surely for the rest. I just wanted to thank you for your time. I wanted to see if there are any more questions, even if they're in the chat or anything like that. I don't see anything at this moment in time. Yeah, don't see anything. All right, so we'll leave it there. I do want to just present again, not that today's session wasn't wonderful, but just also to present again that we have other sessions that are just as great as this that are coming up later on this week. There's 2 tomorrow and there's 2 on Friday. So if you haven't already signed up, please do. And we look forward to seeing you there. Ed, was there anything you'd like to add before the end of the session?
No, that's absolutely fantastic. Thanks very much, Tosin, for your time today, and really inspirational talk. And yeah, sign up for the rest of them by the BCSD MSG website. And thanks, Sonubi, for hosting. Really great.
Well, thank you. And thank you again, Tosin. Lots of great nuggets of information. You're going to have me doing some hard thinking. You know, how can I help my organization also? Because yes, I'm in data, but it's a diversity, right? So a lot to think about.
Thank you so much for having me.
No,
it's been great.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope we've given everyone else on the call something to think about. And with that, we'll leave you to it. Have a great, great evening, everyone. Until next time.
Thank you. All right.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.